I'm hoping everybody can see this. I've got some people on my screen and I see some head nods, so that's good. So the name of the project that we've come up with for now, and it has evolved over time, Scaling the Impact of Inclusive Post-Secondary Education. And there's my arrow. And what I'm going to talk to you about in regards to this project is why is scaling inclusive post-secondary education important? What are the successes and benefits of inclusive post-secondary in relation to this particular project? Where certain systems can lead you. We're going to talk about the relationships that are required and that we've been working on in this particular project and what we've learned from that, and the role of inclusive post-secondary within the context of this project. And I'm hoping to get feedback from everybody in regards to that. And it says June 1st here, which is not the case, so we can just ignore the date. So we're going to go to the next slide here, and I'm going to bring Arden in before we do the objective. Well, actually, I'll do the objective first, and then Arden, you can just talk about why you applied for this particular grant. This project is a 3-year systems change project funded by the Vancouver Foundation. And so within this presentation, I'm hoping just to give you information about where we're at, what we've learned, and how we've, staying true to the benchmarks, how that's contributed to some of the key learnings and relationships that we've built. And so I'll just get Arden to talk about, just her thoughts around applying for this grant and what her vision was.
Thanks, Marta. So we've been really lucky to have Marta come and work on this project. We received funding from the Vancouver Foundation to do this work. So we're really grateful to have that support from them. But the sort of impetus for the project was that we saw isolated examples of how facilitators and students and their families were really broadening the impact of inclusive post-secondary beyond the campus. So that sometimes looks like accessing different funding options available to typically enrolled post-secondary students, or connecting early with facilitators while the student was still in high school, so that the vision of inclusive post-secondary could inform the planning around the individualized education plan goals, typically in high school. We also saw that there were all of these other structures and supports and opportunities available to post-secondary students that were not localized to campuses, and that the role of post-secondary student could really take students beyond the limits of campus. So what the project wanted to look at was, how do we move from sort of one-off examples of students sort of breaking down barriers to access the benefits that any typically enrolled post-secondary student would have access to, and how do we build that into our initiative. So Marta's work, and she'll talk about it, is really about connecting with these resources and building their capacity to sometimes expand eligibility, sometimes just raising their awareness and consciousness that inclusive post-secondary is an option for young people in BC. And then trying to think about, how do we make this sustainable over time? So I think that is an overview. Is there anything else, Marta, that you think I should focus on?
I think that was great. And you're going to just pipe in my expression.
Okay.
If you feel I've missed something, that would be great, Arden. Thank you. Okay. So I just wanted to sort of reflect on some of the benchmarks. These aren't all of them that I've been using, and I've actually sort of changed a little. You can see in the light gray, I've added to the benchmarks to help me sort of really focus in on this particular project in the context of high school at this point. And so these have helped me really think about the systems that are in play and the pathways and systems that we want to actually be in, and that students with developmental disabilities are typically not in. So the benchmarks have been really helpful. And it's not all of the ones that I've been using, but these just are the ones that are the most applicable. And just I thought I would share that with you in regards to this. And this is not a very focused slide, so my apologies. But this is just a bit of a framework of what I'm using for the project. And this comes from the Vancouver Foundation and System Change Work. And it's been a really good guide for me to think about where we're at, um, and sort of what to expect at those times. So the first order outcomes, the knowledge and capacity, tools and products, relationships and collaboration. That's really the sort of how with the project we're sort of setting the tone of the project, setting the stage. And it's where I've spent a lot of work initially, and so that's been through mapping, thinking and looking at resources, building some resources that I'll talk to you about that we actually have changed, and then the relationships we're building. So that these really allowed me to really think about those benchmarks, really understand, with Arden's help and Tamara's help as well, um, uh, just to really focus in on the objective and really what I'm, the purpose of the project. The second order outcomes, they take a little bit longer to sort of get, well, you can see there it says policy changes, practice changes. That's a much larger long-term goal, but we are working in that area right now as far as making some changes within systems or resources for students. And then the third order outcome, certainly takes the longest, and that's where the mindsets perhaps can be shifted. That's where I think in the long term we all want to be, in regards to embedding inclusive post-secondary in the minds and the hearts of everybody and within the systems. So that's just a quick overview of that.
Sorry, Marta.
What?
Just talking about that like broader social change, I think the mindsets we want to shift are that people with disabilities require specialized, targeted services and support. And what we have seen to be true in inclusive post-secondary is that the normative pathway or the generic services and supports have all of the knowledge and skills and abilities to assist students to get to university, and that there doesn't need to be that specialized disability service intrusion in that pathway.
Exactly. Thank you. So I'm going to go just to the next slide, and I just want to open it up to everybody. I thought I could do this live on Canva. I can't. So I'm going to stop sharing and just quickly get some, sorry, I can't move this bar. There we go. And just want people to give me their thoughts on what are some of the benefits and successes of inclusive post-secondary that we can scale, because maybe we're missing something. But what are some of the thoughts that people have? You could type it in chat as well, or if you feel that you have something to say, then you can just put your hand up. For example, can we scale increased choice? We know that that's something. That's an example. Autonomy. So somebody's got higher expectations. Great. And I'm going to type them into my PowerPoint, and then hopefully they'll show up when I go back. positive social outcomes. Everyone learns from one another. Confidence. Um, ones, access to post-secondary student loans. And learning being for the joy of learning. Great. Let's hope this works. I'm going to go back to, thanks everybody. I'm just going to go back to share screen and we'll move on. Oh, somebody raised their hand. I missed that. Who would like to speak?
It was me, Trevi. Hi.
Hi, Trevi.
Nice to see you again, Marta.
Nice to see you.
I was just thinking that in addition to all that, and that's a great list, that there's many of the competencies that university students kind of typically learn, like problem solving, organization, communication skills, stress tolerance, teamwork, decision making, and those things can, I believe, all be scaled as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As you can see, my skills for sharing are not the best. Okay, here we go again. Okay, you're gonna have to see my messy desktop then, because I can't get in any other way. Okay, here we go. So the next slide that we're going to look at is my mapping. Let's just make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, my idea didn't work so well there. Okay, so what I did initially when I started the project is I really wanted to get a sense of the systems at play. And so I use this app, it's called MindNode. It's quite handy. And I'm very visual, so I love mapping in general. And so I looked at what are the pathways and the systems and opportunities available to what we like to sort of call the gold standard student, the honor student, the student that's assumed and supported to graduate and perhaps go on to post-secondary education. And it's what I'll just give you a little bit of orientation here. So the green is our provincial government and what they offer. I didn't go as far as federal, I just kept it local. And then the purple here is the school system, Ministry of Education over here funding the school system and the resources available in high school. Up here, we've got post-secondary. And I'm sure I've missed many, many things, but really the whole idea is to sort of get the gist of what's going on. The dotted lines represent professionals, systems that are connected to each other and how they support the student. And the solid lines represent what the student basically has control of. And so you can see and what they have access to directly. So you can see with this particular graduate over here in this purple area, the counselor always stands out quite prominently in planning for post-secondary. So you can see they've got access to the counselor, and in BC, our counselors have many, many different roles. So they're all listed here, but one of them is around career development, helping students with thinking about university, choosing universities and getting that information. Students also have access to their generalist teachers, you know, if they're really interested in a certain topic and they want to study that in higher education, you know, they can certainly have teachers as mentors. They also, in our province, we have career planning which is a part of the curriculum, career life education. And so the students have access that actually throughout their entire school life from kindergarten to grade 12, and grade 10 to 12, they really focus in on those career connections and mentoring and work experience and planning for post-secondary. So you can see there's lots of options through the government as well, and there's lots of resources available. So Work BC, student aid, scholarships as well, as we know, is a big thing. So that gives you like a really nice visual of what a student, and we'll dive into that a little bit more later. And so this is a visual for a student with a developmental disability who typically, if you really dive into the resources, the assumption is that they will not be graduating well with a Dogwood, and they will not be going on to higher education. There are options for post-secondary opportunities, but with all the resources that I've looked at, I think only once did I ever see something written that said post-secondary, but there was really no other connection and resource to that. So we'll go through this in a little bit of a different way. Well, the same way actually. So you can see the green again is the government resources. And then on the left, you can see the purple is the school resources. And I think what probably will stand out for most people is there aren't as many resources in high school. And you can see that, what we've learned and what I've learned personally as a parent as well, advocating for inclusion in high school, is that learning support teacher is it pretty much, right? They're case managers. They're expected really to fill the role, all the roles that the graduate, all those specialists that they have access to. Most students with developmental disabilities, this is the teacher they have access to. I don't have EAs in here. I actually missed that. I should have had that in there because, of course, they are the support that students would have access to as well. So the expectation is that this learning support teacher will know it all. They'll know everything about post-secondary academics, everything. So I think you can kind of see where we're going with this. The other piece that I want to point out is just if you look at the dotted lines, you can see there's a lot more. I think on the last screen there were 3, and you can see the student just doesn't have as much access to things directly. So the students they have to go through different people to get to the resource that they want often. Now, CLBC is our service provider. Of course, services are important and getting funding for support. But you can see that the student and the family, there's very few opportunities for direct connection to a particular resource. The other thing I want to point out is some language that I've been using just to sort of look at these two mind maps and to think about the systems, is to break them down between power, purpose, relationship, and flows of resources. So if I go back to this particular one, the graduate screen, if you think about where the power, or who holds the power in this particular screen, I mean, it's obvious that the student does. So the student, perhaps their family, because they're influential in often if the student wants to attend post-secondary or not. But you can see that's where the power is held. The purpose for that student, if you look at any Ministry of Education, whatever province you're in, you look at what their mandate is. The mandate for our school Ministry of Education is, I'll just read it to you. The purpose of the British Columbia school system is to enable learners to develop their individual potential and to acquire the knowledge, skills, and attitudes needed to contribute to a healthy society and a prosperous and sustainable community. So sounds pretty good, and sounds like they're doing a good job on this particular screen, but maybe not so much on the other. The relationships that the graduate is making, they're building relationships with every one of these connections. So counselor, generalist teacher, they have a lot of really great mentors and people in their life that they can connect to post-secondary. And you can see the flow of resources. I already talked about that a little bit. on that screen. So if we go back to this visual and we sort of use the same language, I think not as much power is in the hands of the student. I think you can see that most of it is perhaps in the hands of a learning support teacher. It's not that I'm saying that they're bad people. It's just that that's sort of how the system has set that up. If you think about the purpose, this actually was taken out of one of the resources, and the purpose for the way these systems are set up is to provide services and supports to youth transitioning into adult services. And so it's rare that I've seen anything that's written that they want to support a student to live an inclusive life, or to, to plan for their life after high school. The relationships, you can see, if you see sort of where everything's connected, the relationships are solely through disability related services and supports. It's rare to see, we have community services down here as well, although they're connected to disability services, but it's rare you would see any connection to anything other than disability related. And then the flow of resources, I think I spoke about that, was primarily through like this learning support teacher, service providers, and government services. So I'll go on to the next slide. And again, I'm just sort of setting the stage here. So this is just I took the language from some of the resources for a graduating student and popped them into this word bubble. So you can see they're really empowering. These are for sort of your gold standard student. Typically, there's lots of great resources available, and I'm sure you would find the same thing in your provinces, for students to think about life after high school. And so these are the words that come up in choice, was the biggie. Scholarships, you can see how that looks. And so I did the same thing for students with developmental disabilities, and it's pretty obvious how the language changes. It's quite something, actually. It's not, you're not talking about a life in many ways, right? That word transition is obviously used a lot. It came up, but that just gives you an idea. So I just wrote those the language down so you could see it side to side, and thinking about the power of the language that we use in our systems, and how it can help us understand what the problem is here. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was just what are the normative pathways for students planning for their future in post-secondary, and what are the things we pulled out of that map, and what are we working on? So I sort of talked a little bit about the counselors, and I really keyed in on that piece with this project. I think that's one of the most important roles for students to access if they want, as they're planning for life after high school and post-secondary. The counselor, counselor knows about the students in the school. They know about the teachers in the high school. They know about the universities, the faculties often, and they have a direct connection often to the recruiters or to resources that give them that information. And so we really zoned in on some of those resources. So the counselor gets the information. There's online resources. One of ours is called Post-Secondary BC, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. I mentioned the recruiters. Then they have access to university view books. And then there's the generalist teachers that counselors can actually help with a student who perhaps is interested in a particular subject and wants to study that at post-secondary. One of the things we learned about while I'm sort of on this line, I'll just give you a little bit of information about the resources that we were using. initially I thought, oh, I'm going to create a website that's going to have all these wonderful things in it that actually give students access to all these things I'm discovering. And I really wanted it to be sort of an example of what could be, because there was nothing like that out there. And then, so I did that, and we put a timeline on it. It was like, this website will blow up in, 2 years, we hope, because there'll be something else that's embedded in the normative pathways. And so we did find this Post-Secondary BC website. And basically, it was the site that I was trying to create, except inclusive post-secondary education was not anywhere on this site. And so Arden and I reached out to that particular organization or nonprofit, and really their sole reason of being on this website was to provide information to students, families, and counselors about university options. And they also organize the university fairs and resources, and they keep students up to date with various info nights and that kind of thing that universities hold. So we were able to have a conversation with the administrator of that particular site and talk about what was missing, and the fact that that the students that we support are looking for the same resources. So it was a really good relationship that we built, and they were very open to us being able to provide information on inclusive post-secondary education. So we've now got an article in there. Part of my work around asking for timelines for everybody was to write another article on the history of inclusive post-secondary. So that will be embedded into the website. And they've also now created an extra tab within each university's sort of page within that website that will that's called accessibility, where a student could actually click on that, get university accessibility resources, but we can also put inclusive post-secondary education information in there for any student with a developmental disability who's wanting to know how they can go to university. So that was, I was originally trying to create resources for various systems like that are related to disability, and then we've really learned that what I'm doing is I'm going to build resources for things like a university view book, so that the counselor can have an insert on inclusive post-secondary. So when that student walks into their office, they'll actually be able to help them with that. So that's just an example of sort of just trying to make that shift. What else? Scholarships is a big one. And grants and bursaries. So we're tapping into those as we see something that perhaps was a one-off, like Arden talked about. And can we talk to the organizers or the committees that are responsible for those grants and ensure that students with developmental disabilities can access those scholarships. So we're still working on that. And the education planner is also another online resource that Lisa spoke about a little bit earlier in the week that we have now connected with, and will be able to embed inclusive post-secondary into their website. But again, it takes some intentionality to decide where that information should go and how students are going to access it. So other things like parent advisories are another sort of good access point for going in there. Are there any questions so far? I can't see anybody. So Arden, you could yell out if there's any hands up in the chat.
No hands up. Rachel asked if she could get a link to the website, and Lauren has the Post-Secondary BC website in there.
Yes, and I've got a link right here that I could actually go into right now. But I wanted to, we're going to talk a little bit more about Post-Secondary BC as well. So I wanted to talk about sort of this great revelation that Lisa and I had, and I hope Lisa's here. I can't see anything. So Lisa, if you're here and you want to add anything, please do. It would be great to get your input. So as I've been working on this on this project and trying to get access to these I call them access points and resources for all students. And when we came across the Post-Secondary BC website, it was basically the website that I was building. It was like, oh my God, we need to have access to that. So I was doing this. The administrator was helping us sort of create those access points. And at the same time, Lisa, as you know, with her presentation, has been really building deep relationships with NBIT. And so when Lisa and I came together to update each other on sort of the work that we were doing, we realized that she was all like we were both coming to the same place. And so what it has allowed us to do is use sort of NVIT as an example to embed inclusive post-secondary into the Post-Secondary BC website. And it's still in process, but if I can, hopefully if I click on that, I'll get into their website.
While you're doing that, Marta, I'll just talk a little bit about the insight that we gathered in doing this project. Is we're really intentional in thinking about what are the normative pathways for students in all areas of the campus. So when it comes to recreation, student government, student society, registration, but we had completely missed thinking about the recruitment efforts of the post-secondary institutions that we are partnered with. And so this helped us realize the blind spot that we had when we were thinking about that coherent student experience.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where this this website becomes so important in that. Except my computer's so slow. So this institution directory is a place where recruiters actually put information from their universities into this system. And so you can see the universities and colleges here. And so when you go in, it's sort of like their mini website. That it's not their actual website. It's just it's information embedded within this website. I'm just going to find one that actually has the access button on it. So if you go in, and so these tabs here, so they've we talked to him and they added the accessibility tab because every university is going to need that. It should have been there in the first place, really. And they've added the Indigenous students tab as well. And so this information is input by I don't think it's specifically the recruiter, but it's the person who works in that particular department. They're trying to get the information to the counselors. And so now what Lisa is able to do is talk to her contacts at NBIT and say, okay, now there's this tab available for you to activate within this site. And now we can put, we're not partnered with BCIT, so this is just their accessibility department, but now we can actually insert information for students about inclusive post-secondary education. So that's just an example of some of the systems that we're trying to get into. Just go back. Lisa, did you want to contribute? Did you want to add anything?
Hi, good morning. I'm just no, I really think you've done a good job at kind of talking about the growth of that. I think one of the things that we kind of need to emphasize maybe would be our language and giving the universities where we are at the opportunity to think about how we want that to be inserted. So we're kind of in that place right now, which is how do we want it to look? So I know for, in particular, MVIT, we're trying to have that united front between the disabilities sector, the attested, and then myself. So we really want to make sure that we're staying true to that unity moving forward. And I think that that's going to be quite unique for every university that we're at, because if there's anything that we can take away from our initiative is that we do so much work to make sure that we align well with each of the universities, because they are all unique. And I think that's what makes it a good partnership. So all of these new areas that Marta has been talking about, we want to continue honoring those in the same manner. So I'm super excited to be able to be able to see what this is going to look like in a little bit, and what that language will look like. But no, I think you've done a wonderful job, Marta. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. And that just reminds me of another, just sort of a short story, and then we'll open it up to questions that I wanted to share. Maybe I'll just stop sharing at this point. Another sort of a learning that I had was the responses that I was getting between sort of the two different systems. And so an example of that has been we were able to connect with a school district and have some really, really great and positive meetings around the conversation of trying to allow students with developmental disabilities to have access to counselors within that school district. And so I had a contact in the school district, and so we were able to get a meeting, and it was really positive. You know, they got it. We were able to, they wanted us to send them sort of a process document that gave them an idea of, you know, whose responsibility is to do what. And they really liked it. It was a good positive energy. I think they saw it. They saw the importance of having that counselor involved in that relationship with the student. And then it got sent to this to the special education department, and we haven't seen anything or heard from anybody since. So you know, and again, I'm sure they're very busy, but it was just interesting. And so I, throughout the process, and again, I think it's just because it's harder to make the changes within those systems, and I'm sure there's much, you know, there's much more about that. But what we've done is, you know, I've just made that shift, and I'm just solely looking at I'm looking outside of the disability community and really going into those systems. And the reaction is and the willingness to have a conversation and to actually open up these access points has been quite something.
Something
So-
else to add to that, Marta, that I'm thinking about would be we have to work with our secondary schools, and, you know, making sure that we're establishing those good relationships with them, because they're stuck in systems. I'm guaranteeing that at some point, somebody in that space is recognizing that some things aren't the same, or that they're been untouched or underutilized. So our approach with the secondary schools is really to have that gentle conversation about, you know, where do you see it and what kind of movement can we make? And Merit only has one. So I have to really think about, you don't want to go in burning your bridges. I can't afford to do that. So we still have to maintain that and build on that good relationship. And it's a fine line in there between your school district and your secondary school. And then of course, with our initiative, between what Marta's role is, and I might have the resources on the ground, but the bigger picture is what Marta's always looking at and striving for. And she's got all that knowledge behind her. So we're in the process of looking at how do we get that advisory committee kind of created at Merit to help lead us in a good way and not take away any of their power for what they are doing and what they have been doing. So it's really important that we thought about all those things moving forward.
Thanks, Lisa.
Marta,
Yes.
if you don't mind me piping in, I think I really love hearing about your reflections on your experiences of engaging post-secondary BC versus special education planning in school districts. And I think it comes back to the language that you found and the purpose of those systems and the typical pathways setting people up to go to post-secondary. It's about resourcing students, empowering them, giving the information they need. And the other one, that transition pathway, is about controlling, predicting, making sure that services are in place. And so I think that is the difference in those responses.
Mhm.
And then just going back to the very beginning where we're thinking about what can we scale from inclusive post-secondary, I think what we do is we line ourselves up to do light touch and support and capacity building of the systems that already exist. And so that's really what Marta has been doing with this project. And that's a piece of the scaling what we do on campus.
Thanks, Arden. So like, I wonder, even I can pose a question to everybody that you guys can think about. And, if you feel like answering now, that's great. But what do you think, after hearing this, the role of inclusive post-secondary is in influencing these pathways? Arden had mentioned, when we were discussing this, just like, in order to exist, in order for inclusive post-secondary to exist, we need to recruit students. That would be sort of the most obvious, but, do we have a responsibility to ensure? So I'll just open that up, and if anybody has any questions as well, feel free. Trevi.
Hi again. Excellent presentation, Marta. That was just very informative and very captivating. I just loved it. One of the things that we've found beneficial here in Manitoba is we work with our, the high schools and things to ensure that students who have intellectual, developmental, and multiple disabilities have those same choices and options that are represented, for example, like at career fairs that occur. So I go to career fairs, set up, a big pop-up banner, put a little bowl of candy out, and we have a number of pamphlets. I sometimes have a little video playing in the background. And I also sometimes pay students an honorarium and invite them to come with me, so that if other students who are there have questions, they can speak directly to students and learn a little bit more about their own individual stories and personal experiences from the Campus Life program. I think additionally, another thing that's beneficial is leaving a bunch of those, informational brochures and pamphlets, articles, and things like that. That's in a kind of, we have like the University of Manitoba logo on it, and it, looks like something everybody else is getting. And we leave those with resource and the counseling offices, so that students who might have been thinking about it or seen it and then maybe have questions and want to go back are able to do so. Another thing that we've done is in Manitoba, and I'm sure elsewhere as well, there's students often attend for the ages of 18 to 21 after they continue on with high school for those 3 years. And so sometimes we have students who start to transition from high school to the Campus Life program. So that instead of, like, for example, being every single day at their high school, between that age, they'll come Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the high school, and then Tuesday and Thursday, they'll be at the university. And then after they're completed those years, they'll make the full transfer over to the university at some point in the process. So that's also been something that we've been able to kind of organize with counselors who have been, really supportive of, in Manitoba anyway, of the Campus Life program. And we just think it's important for those students to have those choices, just like the other students in schools would when they're looking at, there's all those booths that get set up. It's nice for them to have booths to look at as well. So thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Trevi, for those examples. Those are great.
And I just have one question, because what we have been going to transition fairs, so that's where students with a label go and they get to see all of the community disability resources that they could choose from, and then there's inclusive post-secondary. But what we found when we dug into it is that there are post-secondary fairs for students who want to go to university, and we weren't in those places. And when we dug into it even more, we found that the students with developmental disabilities were not only not invited but told that they don't belong in those places. So we thought that that was one place that we also really wanted to influence.
Thanks, Arden. Charmaine.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo, I think, what you just shared, Arden. I think we've kind of done it a few different ways, and sometimes we find in different communities how we approach it has to look different depending on I think some of the experiences of families. So like one example I can think of is there's a few communities that are we would probably have that very same experience where we wouldn't anticipate students that have developmental disabilities to be showing up to a college or like a fair at a school. And even if they did, there's still TVP options available in some post-secondary institutes in Alberta. And I find recruitment tends to kind of gear people to, you have a disability, so TVP is naturally kind of your starting point. And in a few places we've even seen where like recruitment, I think that is kind of their own bias, I guess, around where they see people fitting in that box. But we've also seen families who have really struggled with the fear of their son or daughter not having support after if they give up or choose a different pathway. If they live in a small community where there's only 2 service provisions and we're kind of seen as like a new opportunity, there's been a lot of pushback or kind of things that have come up where it's taken a lot of time for us to then be able to support families to try and kind of dream a bit more. And yeah, I think it's just created a bit of a tension as to we haven't been able to find kind of like one smooth mode to be able to find or like create good good perspective student approaches that necessarily fully align with us connecting with like the typical kind of prospective student processes, but then also recognizing families will then say like, we wouldn't typically go to those places and spaces. So you've also cut us out of that picture by not creating good access. So it has been kind of like a bit of a juggling act to figure out how and where we navigate that. But I think that some of the things that you posed in your presentation are just refreshing to go back to, also to think about how do we ensure that we're not completely wavering to one side of the pendulum, but also thinking about how are we supporting families earlier on to start having this as a part of their vision so that by the time their child reaches high school, they already know about it.
Yeah, exactly, Charmaine. And stay tuned to the next session. We'll be talking about that. One thing I didn't mention was actually the connection with university students and organizations. We've found in BC, there are a couple of organizations that are run by university students or alumni that are connecting with the high schools and giving them information about what to expect in post-secondary. And so that's another access point that Arden has, I think, had this sort of a vision. Imagine if we can get the youth asking where the students are in high school with developmental disabilities, and wouldn't that make some amazing changes? And so we've had some good conversations with one particular group, and so that's still in the process, but that's another thing to think about. Okay.
There are a few comments in the chat, Marta.
Yes.
Rachel says, I think we have a responsibility to try to reevaluate and change these pathways, current perspectives, and secondary education. We have a unique role where we're looking very big picture at the systems at play and long-term goals of students because of our place in post-secondary education. Because of that, we're almost a gateway for connection and change between the systems before, during, and after post-secondary education. Stanford has to get a COVID test, so he says goodbye. And Heather says, I had to ask the high school to include my student in university college fairs. It just wasn't on anyone's radar. They totally stepped up when they realized so, and the student came back with a bag full of brochures. And then Jamie says, connecting with families can be helpful as well. Sometimes teachers might pick and choose who they give this information to about post-secondary.
Yes, very, very true. Lisa.
Yeah, I'm glad that Jamie identified that, because that was something that we experienced here was we only have 3 seats. So it was the support people at our local secondary school that was saying, well, they would just tell who they felt was the best fit and wasn't sharing the information across the board. So there was a little bit of work to be done there, and being really honest about that, how they were feeling. But also there was, I like how Arden talked about that kind of light brushing, because even at NVIT, when we joined in on the student recruitment, we thought we finally get in there, we get to join them as they do their full-on student recruitment. They there was some struggles even with that, because they didn't think about it, I guess, the same way that we might think about it. So for example, it was just a really small, tight area. They put me right in the middle of the both of them, when we know students who might have some mobility issues couldn't get into that space. So I really had to be patient and talk about it after, right? Like, you know, these were kind of some of the struggles. Did you guys get a sense of that? I ended up just going right to the resource room because nobody came at all. So we knew there was some work that had to be done in those areas. But I think that, again, it's the assumption that they already know isn't always there. Sometimes we just have to kind of help them see it differently. I always think about my learning process and I think, man, I must have learned real slow, because I felt like it took me forever to really grasp just some of the simple concepts that we had to do in building that relationship and sharing that information.
Thanks, Lisa. So we're at 10 o'clock. Faith also had a comment here as well. I think in Saskatchewan, not many parents see it as a viable option when we are only accepting a couple of students a year. I do think, however, it is important to look at all these pathways. Perhaps creating demand will help in the end to do away with the initiative and become more mainstream or just part of student body at university. Thanks, Faith. So I think we'll end it there. Feel free though to connect with me, with myself or Arden or Lisa in regards to any other comments or questions you've got in regards to the project. We'd love to hear from you. And when I get that timeline done finally, and we publish it to the Post-Secondary BC website, I will make sure I send it out to everybody. And thanks for those who have given me their information.
Thanks, Marta. So we'll take a 10